Okay, again, so welcome everybody to this year's annual Tobias Lecture in Jewish Studies. The series was established almost 30 years ago by a generous gift from Marjorie and the late Harry Tobias, both loyal alumni of UW. And the series has featured distinguished scholars from all fields of Jewish studies. This year's no exception. And we thank the Tobiases for their generosity and ongoing and enduring support. Typically, the Center for Jewish Studies holds one Tobias lecture per year, but when we decided to invite Professor Moshe Halbertal, we couldn't resist asking him to deliver two. A prolific scholar known inside the academy and well beyond, Professor Halbertal is one of the world's foremost authorities on Jewish religious thought and philosophy. He has taught at Yale University, University of Pennsylvania, Harvard University, and he currently holds appointments in both New York University's Law School and the Hebrew University's Philosophy Department. He has authored and edited no fewer than 11 books in English and Hebrew, including The Birth of Doubt, Confronting Uncertainty in Early Rabbinic Literature, Maimonides, Life and Thought, In the Beginning of Politics, Power in the Biblical Book of Samuel, co-authored with Stephen Holmes, to name just 3 of his many books. Professor Halbertal's articles have appeared in the New Republic, in the New York Review of Books, in the Jewish Review of Books, in many other magazines and newspapers, not to mention scholarly journals. And finally, and notably, Professor Halbertal is the co-author of the Israeli Army's Code of Ethics. His lecture today is entitled The Biblical Book of Samuel and the Birth of Politics, Two Faces of Political Violence. And I want to note that tomorrow, at the same time, he will address the question, is a Jewish democratic state possible? So Professor Halbertal, it's an honor to welcome you, albeit virtually, to the University of Wisconsin.
Thank you. Thank you very much for having me. It's good that I'm sorry that we don't have the opportunity to be in person, as they say today, but at least we have this medium. So welcome to everyone, and I hope one day we're going to meet face to face and in Madison. But it's a great honor to be with you, and thanks for participating. The subject of today is the book of Samuel and the birth of politics, in particular, its understanding of political violence. I want to say, by way of introduction, before exploring his understanding of political violence, the book of Samuel is known as really one of the most powerful, greatest literary works in the Hebrew language. I think it's still maybe the best book written in the Hebrew language. But besides its literary qualities, and there's many discussions among them, by the way, I just want to mention Robert Alter's great translation and commentary, many discussions on its literary qualities. But what makes a great literary work into a work in political thought is that the insights that we can draw from the stories, from the characters, really transcend their times, because, as I will try to show, our author, the great author of the book, of the stories they're going to read, is really an astute observer of politics, of power. He's telling the narrative of the 2 first kings in Israel, Saul and David, and he's clearly exploring the problem of power. And he points to structural features of power that resonates far beyond the particular narrative, beautiful narrative that he's crafting and telling. Now, I mentioned that he's speaking about the 2 first kings, and one feature that is particular that enables the sort of exploration that he's engaging, the author, is that prior to the book of Samuel, there are no kings in Israel. In the book of Judges, we have Samuel himself is the last of the judges, maybe. We don't have a sovereign. By sovereign, I mean we don't have someone who either can tax or draft. Every sovereign, be it a monarch or a liberal sovereign, always has the power to draft and tax. And the judges don't have that power. They are just charismatic leader, ad hoc saviors of a community in trouble. They call upon the people to fight against the Midianites, against the Ammonites. Usually a kind of tribal militias. Usually not many show up to the battle. But there is no political sovereign structure. Not only that, we see also within the book of Judges a voice that resists theologically the idea of a king, right? People come to Gideon, one of the greatest judges, and says, you'll be our king, you'll be Shol banu gam ata gam bincha, you'll be our king, you and your son. And Gideon refuses that and says, Lo ani emshol bachem, lo bni emshol, I'm not going to rule over you, neither my son. God is your ruler, God is your king, it's the kingdom of God. Now, when we come to Samuel, and this is a big transformation in biblical political theology, we are told that the elders, the people, are really resisting the prior arrangement. They need a steady force to counter the Philistines who are a threatening force. They need a standing army. They need taxation. They need power to protect them. And they ask Samuel to appoint a king that will fight their wars. So, very important in terms of ancient political theology. Usually in the ancient Near East, kings are not there as a result of historical circumstances. They are mythic power. They're part of the furniture of the cosmos. Really, they are even before the people. Here is a story of the Israelite king that his a result is not part of nature, cosmos. He's not a god, neither an incarnation of God. He's a human force established as a request under pressure of the tribes of Israel to have a king that will unite them, that will establish a military, that will tax, that will create a standing force that will confront their threats. Now, we know that under resistance, under great ambivalence of Samuel, even God is ambiguous about that. God agrees for the Israelites to have a king, and he tells them what is the law of the king. And by the way, here is something very interesting. As Samuel formulates Mishpat HaMelech, the law of the king, he basically formulates the deepest problem in all political theory altogether. And he says this will be the rule of the king that will rule over you, right? I'm reading now from Samuel 1, chapter 8. He will take your sons for his chariots, etc., etc. He will appoint. He will make them officers. He will make them plow his plow, etc. Something very interesting. He says to them, they will do his job, his work, his wars. They're not going to be, and that's very important, it's not going to be your wars, it's going to be his wars. And here's the first articulation. I mean, we have a problem dating the text 10th century BC, that's the earliest, 8th century BC, whatever the date is. But it might be the first articulation of the main problem of politics, which is the following. If the sovereign has a power to protect you, he also has a power to threaten you. All political structures will have to deal with this problem. And it's first articulated by our author under these conditions of this new sovereign, which is neither a god. Here is a new political space where God is not the king and the king is not a god. We have a king, a human king, that now the author will turn his astute gaze, and I'm saying I think is one of the deepest thinkers about politics. I'll try to show that as we go along in the lecture. He's turning his gaze into the dynamics of power. Okay, Now, before I get to the question of political violence, I want to say an insight that this author has about politics and some of the problems of politics. And I'm going to articulate it in abstract and then show how our author deals with it. Politics suffers from two reversals. Power suffers from two reversals. They are at the heart of politics. The first reversal is the following. For citizens, for subjects, power is an instrument. It is a mean to a goal, a mean to an end. We need power for protection. It can do lots of good. For the sovereign, many times, power turns from a mean, it turns into an end. There is a reversal of means ends with that question. You know, we are soon facing an election here, and you ask yourself, what is the goal of the president in the first term? The main goal, not the only goal, hopefully, to be elected in the second. So structurally, this is a structural vulnerability. For the one who has power, power becomes an end rather than a mean, rather than an instrument. Because of that, and that's the second reversal that is at the heart of politics. Because of that, power tends to do another reversal, which is it tends to take other ends and instrumentalize them as means to him staying in power. So there are two reversals. Let's discuss one story where that happened. You know, Saul is already the king. I'm sure many of you know the stories of Samuel. Saul is the king. Now there is a new threat, David, emerging in his court. Everybody loves David. He has immense charisma. And among those who fall in love with David is Saul's own daughter, Michal. And it says in chapter 18, verse 2, "Vatehav Michal bat Shaul," David, the Michal, the daughter of Saul, loves David, as Robert Alter in his wonderful commentary here points to the fact that this is the only place in the Bible where it says that a woman loves a man. Usually it's the reverse. And she's in love with him. And they tell Saul that his daughter is in love with David. Vayishar hadavar be'einav, he says that's good. But, and here's a very interesting but, Saul wants to use Michal as a bait to destroy David. And he says to David, you want to marry into the royal family, you have to bring dowry, you're from a poor family. Bring me 100 foreskins of Plishtim, of the Philistines. The idea is that the Plishtim wouldn't like this. And they're going to kill them. They're going to kill David. Vatihi boyat Plishtim. In that way, he's going to get rid of a competitor, of a rival. And David succeeds and brings him 200. The whole plot fails. But you ask yourself the following question. If Saul's plan would have succeeded, basically what Michal would have felt, she will be completely broken. Not only that, she will understand that she was used as a bait, as a trap for killing David. And this is a moment in which the sovereign instrumentalizes people around him in order to stay in power. Now, a father ought to love his daughter. Love is a non-instrumental relationship. You don't use the people you love. You just love them. You care for them. And here's a case in which power as that force, as that corrupting force, in this case on Saul, that he begins to instrumentalize his environment, in this case his own daughter, to stay in power, facing a rival. So we have basically what I would call two reversals at the heart of politics. Now, I'm mentioning that this is a feature that I think the author is very, very astutely aware of and explores, but it has immense immense repercussions in the following story. And I want to discuss two cases of political violence in our book, in which the sovereign kills innocent civilians, destroys them, and he uses his political power to do that. The first story is the massacre of the priests of Nov by King Saul, and the second story is the killing of Uriah by King David. These are the two stories we're going to read carefully. And in the background, we have this problem of what I would call the two reversals that are at the heart of the problem of power. Now, again, and I hope we're going to discuss that as well, these are not necessary. It doesn't have to happen. Those reversals do not have to happen. But it's what I would call a structural vulnerability of power. Okay. I want to begin reading our first story, which is in 1 Samuel chapter 22, and I'm going to read verse 6 now. We can have it shown on the screen, so you can all see that with me. I'm gonna read. Maybe if we don't have it yet, I'm gonna start reading the Hebrew text. Some of you have access to the book of Samuel. Maybe you can have access to the book on your own. I'm reading from 1 Samuel chapter 22. And it begins with the following. The background is David is escaping from the court of Saul after Saul is attempting to kill him. He's escaping towards the Judean desert. And Saul begins to pursue him. And it's kind of a deadly pursuit. And the verse says, verse 6 of this chapter says, וישמע שאול כי נודע דוד ואנשים אשר איתו. You can see verse 6, you have here chapter 22 on the screen. Verse 6, and Saul heard that David was discovered and the men that were with him. Now Saul was sitting in Gibeah under the tamar tree in Ramah with his spear in his hand, and all his servants were standing about him. We have a situation of Saul and his people around him. He is holding the spear. The spear is a known article, a known object in the story, because this is the spear that Saul tried to assassinate or kill David before. And that's a kind of a scene, an opening scene of a very bloody story. Now we go to verse 7. And Saul said unto his servants that stood about him, hear now, you Benjamites, will the son of Ishai, Jesse, give every one of you fields and vineyards? Will he make you all captains of thousands and captains of hundreds? That all of you have conspired against me, and there was none that disclosed it to me when my son made a league with the son of Jesse, and there is none of you that is sorry for me, and disclosed that to me, that my son have stirred up my servant against me to lie in wait as at this day. Right? Here's a scene of we would say, a very insecure Saul, who feels there is a conspiracy around him. He attends to his servants. All of his are from his own tribe, the tribe of Benjamin. We know that that's where the tribe of Saul comes from. And he's in a grip of paranoia and suspicion. I want to say one thing, that how do you get to that state? When I think one way in which such break of trust happens to a sovereign, to a king, is when actually he begins to instrumentalize his own surrounding, his own environment, and his environment begins to instrumentalize him And there is a complete break of trust. So here's the king, completely isolated and in condition of real paranoia, real suspicion, a sense of conspiracy around him. And the story will be, and this is the heart of this story, it's that, and that's what our author will be interested in, is what I would call the lethal combination of insecurity and power, right? We all know that when a sovereign feels insecure and he has power, he becomes dangerous. And Saul is in that condition. Now we move to verse 9. By the way, there are many very fine literary points here in those verses that deserve close reading, but I want to get to the main point of violence and politics. Saul alone. The word everyone, kulchem, appears 3 times in this verse. Kulchem, I. He's the victim. There's always a case in cases of paranoia where there is a reversal of aggressor and victim. He's actually the one who pursues David to kill him. He feels that David is ambushing and trying to kill him, etc. Then answer Doeg the Edomite. I want to say something about this figure, Doeg the Edomite, and it belongs to a chapter before chapter 21. In the earlier chapter, we heard that when David escaped from Saul's court, what he did, he went to Nov, the priestly clan in Nov, where there is an altar to God, and he asks Achimelech, the priest, for supply. He's a fugitive. He doesn't have any supply. Achimelech kind of wonders, why is David alone? David is an officer, a general in Saul's court. He's the son-in-law of the king. He wonders, why are you alone? David tells him, I'm a secret mission. Nobody knows. I left all the entourage somewhere else. Give me supply. The priest gives him food, gives him also a sword, the sword of Goliath. He supplies him with food and arms. And Doeg Adomi is watching them, seeing the priest helping the fugitive David. By the way, the priest has no idea that David is escaping Saul, and Saul perceives him as a rebel against the king. He thinks he's actually helping one of the king's officers. Now, here's a very interesting moment in the story, verse 9. Then answered Doeg the Edomite, who was set over the servants of Saul, and said, I saw the son of Jesse coming to Nov, to Achimelech, the son of Achitub. I saw him. Verse 10. And he inquired of the Lord for him, and gave him victuals, and gave him the sword of Goliath, the Philistine. Basically, he said, you want to know who's conspiring against you? It's not us. It's not the people around you. It's not your entourage. It's not the people close to you. It's that priest who's been supplying David with food and sword. Here's, by the way, a fascinating lesson about paranoia, which is paranoia can be moved from, paranoia doesn't have a fixed subject, a fixed object. It travels, and it can be easily moved. So what Doeg does, and we know many times leaders are magnets to lies. Doeg says to the king, he says, you're right, there is a conspiracy against you. It's not us. It's the priest. And as we say, a feature of paranoia is the traveling object of paranoia from here to there. And Saul said, we are in verse 12, and Saul said, hear now thou, son of Achitub. No, sorry, verse 11 before. Then the king sent to call Achimelech the priest, the son of Achitub, and all his father's house, the priests that were in Nob, and they came, all of them, to the king. Very interesting also feature of paranoia. Doeg said to him, it's Achimelech who conspired against you. What David does, what Saul does, he says, bring me all his household, all the men around him, right? Paranoia is mobilized and also inflates, extends, gets broader and broader. Bring me all of them. They're all against me. By the way, that will have a devastating impact. The enlarging, the broadening of the group of suspects will have a devastating impact because soon they're going to all be slaughtered. And the king says to them, bring me all of them. And Saul, verse 12, and Saul said, hear now, thou son of Achitub. And he answered, here I am, my Lord. Hineni Adoni. Here I am, my Lord. The priest says, I'm here. I'm yours. I'm your servant. And Saul said unto him, why have you conspired against me, you and the son of Jesse, in that you have given him bread and a sword, and have inquired of God for him, that he should rise against me to lie in wait, as at this day. He blames him. He says, you have conspired against me, you and David. Then Ahimelech answered the king and said, and who among all your servants is so trusted as David, who's the king's son-in-law, and gives heed unto thy bidding, and is honorable in thy house? He says, have I begun to inquire of God for him? Be it far from me. Let not the king impute anything unto his servant, nor to the whole house of my father, for thy servant knows nothing of all this, less or more. Ahimelech the priest denies the charges. He said, look, David is your son-in-law. He's an officer in your court, a very honorable person. I thought by helping him, I'm helping you. He's denying. Now, one feature of paranoia, besides that besides that it can move, and besides that it can broaden, it also blindens. It kind of shuts the person who's possessed by it. And the king said, thou shalt surely die, Ahimelech, thou and all thy father's house. The king has a verdict of death for Ahimelech and all of his father's house. Here is the beginning of a horrible massacre that its source is in a combination of the lethal combination of power and insecurity. Now we follow the story to verse 17. If you can move the page a little bit so we can see the full verse of verse 17 and 18. And the king said to the guard that stood around him, about him, right? The guards should say, the guard, his bodyguards. Turn and slay the priests of the Lord, because their hand also is with David, and because they knew that he fled and did not disclose it to me. He gives an order to his guard, said, slay those priests. But the servants of the king would not put forth their hand to fall upon the priests of the Lord. The servants, his bodyguards, refused the command. Right? They refuse to perform. It's kind of a moment of disobedience. There is a refusal from the servants to kill the priests. Now what the king does, and that's also an interesting lesson in politics. Verse 18, and the king said to Doeg, turn thou and fall upon the priests. And Doeg the Edomite turned, and he fell upon the priests, and he slew unto that day 75 persons that did wear a linen ephod. And Nob the city of priests, smote him with the edge of the sword, both men and women, children and sucklings, and oxen and asses and sheep, with the edge of the sword. A total massacre of the whole village of priests. Now, what does the what is the Saul does? Since his bodyguards refuses, he turns to the outsider, the Edomite, who's a force that doesn't have the bond, doesn't have the blood bond with those priests. He doesn't have the qualms of killing. As an outsider, he has also a burden of showing his loyalty through the act of crime. And he kills them all. And it's very interesting. I think that's another a lesson in politics that I always think about those bodyguards. They were refusing. They disobeyed the command. But the king and many sovereigns in history can count on that though there will be a passive resistance, people are not going to participate, they're not going to be active enough to prevent the crime from happening. They're not going to take their swords and stop the king and Doeg from killing those innocent priests. So we have here, we read something like 12 verses. A very condensed story. The first I said we're going to talk about 2 cases of political violence. With a very astute observer, because he describes a condition. I think we have 3 lessons about paranoia and 2 lessons about the use of power. The first lesson is paranoia can travel from one object to the other. When a king is in a state of anxiety, his anxiety can travel very easily, can be easily manipulated to shift his blame to other parties, etc., etc. That's what Doeg does. He says it's not us, it's the priest. Second, and that's a very perverse dimension of this feature, emotional state, it expands. So the king, they tell him it's Achimelech, he brings all the male family with Achimelech as part of the gang. And third, it blinds, because Achimelech has a very good case for his innocence, which Saul is not going to listen to. The 2 other lessons is that even a king, when he wants to perform a massacre, needs those who carry the means of violence of the state to cooperate with him. And they might refuse, in the way that Egyptian soldiers are refusing the order of Mubarak to shoot the demonstrators in Tahrir Square. Right? He might refuse. But then comes you can turn to an outsider. If we want to make an analogy, the Alawites, Syrian Alawites will kill Syrian Sunnis. They don't belong to the same, they don't have the same bond and loyalty, etc. You can then turn to the outsider to perform your massacre, as happens many times in history. It's the outsider that also has to prove loyalty. And also you can count on those who resisted passively not to have enough stamina, courage, force, determination to engage actively in order to prevent you from performing the crime. So that's the first story, and it's a powerful story about what I would call the lethal combination of power and paranoia and its impact on political violence. And I want to turn to the second story. It's a very different story, another story of political violence in a completely different atmosphere by a completely different person and king. This time it's David. This is a famous story of the murder of Uriah by the hand of David. And I want to say something about the background of this story. We are in 2 Samuel chapter 11. David is already, Saul is dead. David has established a united kingdom with Judea and the rest of the tribes of Israel. He has defeated the Philistines. He has defeated the Edomites. He's built a palace in Jerusalem. He is very comfortable. He's already well established. And the story begins, if you can maybe just show the English part of the page so we can see the letters a little bit. Yes, good, thanks. The story begins with, and it came to pass, Vayhi leTshuvat hashana, at the return of the year. By the way, the return of the year is Nisan, the month of Nisan, it's spring, right? The beginning of the year, the biblical year is Nisan, it's in the time of spring, around April or so. At the time when kings go out to battle, right? Kings do not fight wars in the winter. That David sent Yoav and his servants with him and all of Israel. And they destroyed the children of Ammon and besieged Rabbah. Right? This is kind of east of Jerusalem, Rabbat Ammon, today Jordan. David sends all of his troops to besiege Rabbah, but David tarried at Jerusalem. The David, as the verse Hebrew said, the David Yoshev Yerushalayim. David is in Jerusalem. Now, this is a detail, a very interesting detail, and you wonder, why is David in Jerusalem while the army is fighting in Rabbah? You might say, well, that's a good sign of a strong king. He doesn't have to micromanage his army. There are state concerns that he has to take care at the home front. Maybe that's the reason he stayed in Jerusalem. But when we move to the second verse, we have a different sense of decadence. The troops are at the front. David is in Jerusalem, and here's the story. And it came to pass at the eventide, right? Le'et ha'erev, towards the evening, that David arose of his bed and walked upon the roof of the king's house. And from the roof he saw a woman bathing, and the woman was very beautiful to look upon. Now we see the king is not that very busy with state affairs. He has woken up from a long siesta, right? It's already evening. He woke up from his bed, and Jerusalem at that time, the evenings or towards the evening, very nice breeze. And he's engaged in what I would say urban voyeurism, right? The roof of the palace is kind of higher than the rest of the buildings in the city. And he sees a very beautiful woman bathing on the roof. And David sent and inquired after the woman. And one said, is not this Bathsheba, the daughter of Eliam, the wife of Uriah the Hittite? So David is sent. By the way, soon we're going to see that the verb send appears here many times in this story, in this powerful story. He's sent to the woman, and they tell him she is Bathsheba, the wife of Uriah. He's a Hittite. And David sent messengers, here is another send, and took her, and she came unto him, and he lay with her, and she was purified from her uncleanliness, and she turned unto her house. This is he slept with her, and that's an important point, that he slept with her after a period was over, because she purified after her period, and now comes an accident. And the woman conceived, she's pregnant, and she sent and told David and said, I am with a child. Hara anochi, I'm pregnant. Now here's a problem. The husband is in the front. He's one of David's officers. David is having an affair with one of his officers, and she gets pregnant. Now David has a problem, and he thinks he has a way to solve it. And David sent to Yoav, his general in the front, saying, send me Uriah the Hittite. And Yoav sent Uriah to David. Right? He sends to the front. He send me David. Send me Uriah. Now we are on verse 7. And when Uriah was come unto him, David asked of him how Joab did, and how the people fared, and how the war prospered. Right? In Hebrew, it's a more powerful verse. Leshlom Yoav, Leshlom Ha'am, Leshlom Milchama, as if this is something. Sometimes good generals do it. They want to know. They want to get a report from the front. They go outside the formal channels. They call on an officer and ask him how things are there. And David said to Uriah, go down to thy house and wash thy feet. And Uriah departed out of the king's house, and there followed him a mess of food from the king. David says to Uriah, why don't you go to your house? Well, the plan is the following, right? Here's soldier comes from the front. He wants to go home. David is giving him a good meal. It's already evening, night, and he's expecting Uriah to sleep with his wife, with Bathsheba. So the pregnancy will not going to be attributed to David, but to the lawful husband. But this plan doesn't work. And here we are in verse 9. But Uriah slept at the door of the king's house with all the servants of his lord, and went not down into his house. Uriah, rather than going home, he sleeps at the door, Shar HaMelech, at the door of the king's palace, with all the servants. He's not going home. And when they had told David, saying, Uriah went not down unto his house, David said unto Uriah, art thou now not come from a journey? Wherefore didst thou not go down unto thy house? I mean, why didn't you go to the house? You came from a journey. It's kind of a... And Uriah said unto David, in verse 11, the ark and Israel and Judah abide in booths, and my lord Joab and the servants of my lord are encamped in the open field. Shall I then go into my house to eat and to drink, and to lie with my wife? As I lived, and as thy soul lived, I will not do this thing. It's a powerful contrast between the loyal officer and the decadent king. Uriah says to David, I'm not going home. I'm not going home. Everybody, the solidarity of the officers says, all the people are there in the front, in the conditions of field encampment. I'm not going to it. By the way, that's readers of this text wonder, is Uriah suspicious? He might be. That's part of the beauty of the narrative, because he adds an element that David didn't mention to him, didn't say explicit. He said, I'm not going to my house to eat and drink and to lie with my wife. As if, is he hinting to David that he knows the plot? Maybe yes, maybe not. That's the power of the story, is to leave these questions open. But David's plot doesn't work. Now David says, I'm going to give it another try. In verse 12, and David said to Uriah, tarry here, today also and tomorrow I will let thee depart. So Uriah abode in Jerusalem that day and tomorrow. And when David had called him, he did eat and drink before him, and he made him drunk. And at the evening, he went out to lie on his bed with the servants of his Lord, but went not down to his house. Uriah is adamant, I'm not going home. The whole plot, the whole scheme falls apart. Now David is doing something. Is shifting gears to a much more vicious plan. And we are in verse 14. And it came to pass in the morning that David wrote a letter to Joab and sent it by the hand of Uriah. If you can scroll the page down a little bit so we can see verse 15 and 16. And he wrote the letter saying, set Uriah into the forefront of the hottest battle and retire from him that he may be smitten and die. Okay. David gives a letter in the hand of Uriah, referred to his general, Joab, saying to Joab, put that guy in the hottest place in the front, retreat, and the Ammonites will kill him. I want to say something about this form of killing and the idea of sending. The send, as I said, the verb send here repeats here again and again all the time. Why is it? Because when you see the plan is not for David to kill Uriah. At the end, the Ammonites will kill him, the enemy will kill him. But, and this is a very basic feature of power. Power is exhibited, is manifested by creating a chain of causes, a causal chain that distances the act of violence from its sovereign source. Right? If you are just a local thug, you have to kill the guy in your own hands. But if you're a king, you can send. Not only that, you can have it in such a way that the enemy will kill him at the end. Now, this feature helps to distance the act of violence from the king and to create a chain, a causal chain in which every part of it can dissociate itself from the act of violence because it spreads upon many actors, right? Distribution of labor in the act of crime is part and parcel of the way politics works, right? Because the longer the chain, the more power you have. Sending is the emblem of power. He sends. By the way, he counts on the loyalty of Uriah, not to open the letter and uncover the vicious plan to kill him. Now, here comes a very brilliant moment of our author. I mean, there are many points we could have looked more carefully in terms of the literary analysis and other things. But here comes a very powerful way, a moment in which you can see the astuteness of the author in his understanding of how those things work. And we are in verse 16. And it came to pass, when Joab kept watch upon the city, that he assigned Uriah unto the place where he knew that valiant men were. Right? He locates Uriah in the place in the front where the enemy is very strong. And the men of the city went out and fought with Joab, and there fell some of the people, even of the servants of David, and Uriah the Hittite died also. It's very interesting. When Joab performs the command that he gets from David, he has to kill more people. This idea of targeted killing, targeted murder, that's a fantasy in the frictionless world of the palace. When you get to the front, You see, Yoav has to cover his own back. He has to cover himself. He cannot go to his officers and say, well, when I whistle, everyone retreats, leave Yoav alone, he'll be killed. That means that this will be the last command that David will be able, that Yoav will be able to give to his officers. He has to cover himself. One lie has to be surrounded with more lies. You cannot just kill Uriah. So Uriah is killed, but with a whole battalion with him. Because as the command moves through the chain, it's being, I would say, improved, right? It's being improved so to protect different parts of the chain from their being put on the spot. Soon we're going to get to what I would call maybe the most brilliant verses about politics in this chapter. But meanwhile, Yoav is performing this command in his own way, and the shift, as I said, from the command to the performance is very deep, very brilliant. And we are in page 18, in verse 18. Then Yoav sent to and told to David all the things concerning the war. And he charged the messengers, saying, when you made an end of telling all the things concerning the war unto the king, he says, now he sends a messenger to report to David. And he says to the messenger, when you tell all the report to the king, it shall be that if the king's wrath arise, the king will be angry. And he will say to you, why did you go close to the city to fight? Right? You knew that they will shoot you from the wall. This is a stupid thing, to get close to a wall when the enemy has an advantage. And then in verse 21, he makes a reference of another biblical story of a woman killing Avimelech, the son of Yerubeshet, just by throwing a big stone from the wall. Why went you so close to the wall? The king will be very, very upset when he will hear it. Then it says to him, then you should tell him, thy servant Uriah the Hittite is dead also. When he will get enraged, tell him Uriah is dead also. He's gonna get calm. By the way, I just want to say one interesting thing, the way the story is being told. Yoav says to his messenger, tell the king that we have lost many soldiers. The king will be completely angry about the stupidity of getting close to the wall. He would tell you, why did you approach the wall so closely? You tell him then, after he's being enraged, you tell him Uriah died, everything is fine. By the way, this is a way to say to the king, and this is another feature of how those chains work, that now this is the way in which Yoav is signaling to David that someone else already knows about that, right? Because if this is the way you tell the story, the messenger knows that the king wanted Uriah to die. This is why he will get calm. Now we will see, and this is another feature, by the way, when you distribute the act of violence across the chain, you're going to become a hostage to the people who have participated in your command, right? Yoav knows it very well, and he signals to David, look, now someone else already knows it, you are now, I have a leverage on you, right? This crime that we have performed together. The messenger is very smart, and we are now on verse 22. The messenger is not going to be that stupid or that not careful. And he says to him, so the messenger went and came and told David all that Yoav had sent for him. And the messenger said unto David, the men prevailed against us and came out unto us into the field. And we were upon them even unto the entrance of the gate. And the shooters shot at your servants from off the wall, and some of the king's servants are dead, and your servant Uriah the Hittite is dead also. Right? So the messenger who actually tells the story differently than what Yoav told him, he says to the king, well, people came out of the city, some enemy forces came out of the city, pursued us, we pursued them, hot pursued, we came close to the wall, that gives him an alibi. How did it happen that they came close to the wall? And then when soldiers died, Uriah died with him, etc. He doesn't tell the story in two stages, because the last thing the messenger wants is for David to know that he knows, because the next letter will be kill the messenger. Now comes, that's the last verse I want to analyze, and then we'll give some summary, more general summary of what we've learned. Now comes a powerful verse. Then David said unto the messenger. Now David sends the messenger back to Yoav. Thus shall you say to Yoav, let not this thing displease thee. אל ירע בעיניך הדבר הזה. Don't be upset by the killing. For the sword devours in one manner or another. Right? If I want to give it another translation, in the Hebrew it says, כי כזו וכזה תאכל החרב. The sword devours this way and that way. Make the battle more strong against the city and overthrow it, and encourage thou him. Go back to the war. I want to focus a little bit on this. כי כזה וכזו תאכל החרב. The sword devours this way and that way. Here's a powerful metaphor that the king is using. The sword is like an autonomous predator. It devours, it has a mouth. Insatiable predator that devours this way and that way, arbitrarily. The war machine. It's the war machine that kills. Right? By the way, he's using something very deep in the experience of soldiers. Anyone who has been in war, how killing is arbitrary. Why this soldier? Why not me? Why, etc. The arbitrariness of death in the battlefield. And David is disassociating from responsibility by saying it's war. It's just the war machine. The sword devours, as if nobody actually holds the sword. It is an independent machine, autonomous, independent machine, devouring. Now, this is the power, and I think the power of the story is the following. In terms of analysis of political violence, it's not just, well, David killed Uriah and then took his wife, etc., etc. The story is subtle. And we see that this is a very subtle, astute reader and explorer of power. And he's interested in the problem of killing through the causal chain, through distribution of labor among many agents, that at the end, Uriah is killed by the enemy. And it tells you a few things about this chain. First, that's the powerful thing. The function of the chain is to create a false sense of disassociation. To say, basically, nobody did it. It's just the war machine. Because you have distanced the originator of the violence from the act of the violence. By the way, when Nathan, the prophet, in the next chapter, reproaches David, and he says to him, "Ve'oto harakta b'cherev bnei Ammon," you have killed him with the sword of the Ammonites. Don't tell me that the Ammonites have killed him. You are holding that sword. So part of the function of political critique will be to make that source transparent, or we would say to squeeze the source back to its source, to squeeze the chain back to its source, right? To make the chain transparent to the origin. So that's one thing. It's kind of what we will call disassociation, the function of distribution of labor in crime to help that false sense of actually nobody did it. The second, and that's the return of the verse to sin. The second, and that's important. As we know, there is no, as the command goes through the chain of command, it's going to be improved because different agents within this chain will have to protect themselves. This is why David thinks that he can kill only Uriah. But when Yoav actually performs the command, he kills more people. Right? It has to be covered with more killing. There's no frictionless killing of one person. Because in war, Yoav has to protect himself. He has to sacrifice more people in order to do it. Third, when you are engaged in that form of action by distance, you're going to be beholden, be hostage to different agents across the chain that are part of this performance, and they're going to use it to have power over you. Therefore, Yoav sends the messenger, implying to David, look, already the messenger knows, if I want, everybody would know, etc. And I would say the ultimate moment of this chapter, and its beauty, it's this metaphor of the sword devours. The sword is an autonomous predator. As if. Okay, I want to stop here and bring everything that we said into a kind of a coherent picture. What do we learn from these two chapters? This is really a study of two moments of really, in some ways, the lower moment and the most debased moment of Saul and David, the killing of their own subjects. One story is really about the relationship between paranoia and violence, or what I would call the lethal combination of insecurity and power, and everything that the author told us about how does that work. The other one, the other story, is not about paranoia, it's actually entitlement. David is entitled. And he's entitled in the sense that he can send, he sends. And it's really a story about disassociation, sending, acting through chain. And we can see the way in which you use, by the way, this distribution of power, distribution of labor across many agents. That's the greatest gift of politics because it enables us collective action that can produce much more than each of us doing work alone. But that same structure might create disassociation, might create distribution of a crime across many agents, and might create that sense that it's just the machine that does it. And we see a critique, a deep critique of that structure of thinking. So we have, as I said, and I think I remember reading the book of Samuel and getting to that verse, the sword devours this way and that way, and saying, well, this author is a grasp of the way power works and the way violence works in the political sphere. So we have studied two moments of violence, and by way of ending my reflections on this, what is the author doing? Well, the author, who's we don't know who he or maybe she, we don't know who they are, who he is, who she is. for me, the real hero of the book, not David, the author. He wants to tell us, I'm gonna tell you what I would call structural vulnerabilities of power. Structural vulnerabilities of power. So if you happen to have power, if you happen to have to be an advisor to a king, part of the court's king, if you happen to be a subject, a soldier, etc., you have to understand those mechanisms in order to overcome them. It's a way of, at the first moment where sovereignty appears in this history of Israelites, where you can see and explore what I would call its shortcomings, as a way of trying, maybe, to make you aware of its vulnerabilities so you can overcome them through learning and observation. And that's just by way of, the book is so rich in so many other instances. I wanted to focus, as I said, on the political thought here, underlying two very terrible stories of political violence and how they're understood by our great author. So thank you, and I would love to take some questions. My pleasure.
Professor Halbertal, thank you for a very rich talk, and I think it gives us a lot to discuss. So I invite anyone out there who I of course,